Two of the most iconic Seahawks from the Super Bowl era could potentially be heading to Canton in 2025. We are going to be discussing and debating whether Beast Mode or ET3 is most deserving to be a first ballot Hall of Famer here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, here by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning worldwide, whether you're in Vancouver, British Columbia, or Salem, Oregon. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time to make Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. It's Matchup Wednesday, as we do each and every Wednesday. We're going to be diving into all the key position battles to watch when the Miami Dolphins travel to face the Seahawks at Lumen Field in week 3, plus plenty of Hall of Fame chatter coming courtesy of our friends over at FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The NFL today announced 167 initial nominees for the 2025 Pro Football Hall of Fame class. And there were plenty of former Seahawks on that list, including 2 first-timers that just became eligible for the Hall of Fame. Marshawn Beast Mode Lynch and Earl Thomas, both perennial All-Pro, Pro Bowl caliber players. They were superstars during Seattle's back-to-back runs to the Super Bowl in 2013 and 2014. Also, for different reasons, these guys were personalities that fans clung to. And listen, we obviously could take a detour and make this all about the Hall of Morals, but that's not what the Hall of Fame is. This is about the best football players that ever played in the NFL. Marshawn Lynch and Earl Thomas were both among the very best, not just at their position groups, but the best players in the NFL at their peak. So the question really becomes, both these guys on the ballot for the first time, Rob, if either one of these guys has a case to make it as a first ballot Hall of Famer, which one do you think has a better chance to be one of those 3 to 5 selections in the 2025 class?
It's a really difficult question, Corbin, because I think that Marshawn Lynch has the advantage just because of the notoriety, the fact that he was beast mode, as you said. Earl Thomas, to me, is the player who was a little bit more of a freakish type of a talent. I remember when I was evaluating him as a redshirt sophomore coming out of Texas, and I didn't think that he had the size to be able to hold up at the free safety position. So I actually evaluated, and I know that a number of NFL teams did as well, evaluate him as the cornerback. And that's because with 4.3 type of speed, you just don't see safeties who have that type of ability. So that to me was one of the questions. But I think when you look at what Marshawn Lynch was able to do, obviously he was a first round selection by the Buffalo Bills coming out of Cal and had some success there. But, clearly his greatest success was with Seattle. And the fact that he was kind of the iconic player, frankly, on the offensive side of the football for Seattle during their Super Bowl runs. I think that's going to help him, but the running back position is right there with wide receiver as being the most difficult to actually be able to break down the door into Canton. There's an awful lot of running backs that get nominated. I mean, hell, Shaun Alexander's got more rushing yards, and I think that we can make a strong case that he also should be in the Hall of Fame. But my goodness, the way that Marshawn Lynch was able to just take over football games, that would be my vote. If I had to choose between the two, that would be my vote for the Seahawks into the Hall of Fame.
So I tend to agree with you on one thing. I think in terms of flash and just pure athleticism, and at his peak, Earl Thomas was as good of a ball-hawking free safety as we have ever seen in the NFL. Tons of interceptions, the tomahawk punch-out forced fumbles that he had 12 of those in his career. An iconic player in the Legion of Boom. I mean, just look at the career numbers, Rob. 713 tackles, the 30 interceptions, 12 forced fumbles. This guy was a force to reckon with throughout his entire time in the NFL when he was healthy. Unfortunately, and listen, I mentioned earlier I wasn't going to go into the Hall of Morals, and I don't think that this is necessarily going to be a huge sway for voters on this, but Earl Thomas has had a lot of issues since his career ended after 2019. He's been in trouble with the law multiple times, and the fact that his career just ended abruptly, Baltimore cut him because he got into a fight with a teammate, and it sounds like there have been some other things going on before that, but he only played 1 year in Baltimore, and then nobody wanted to touch the guy when he still was a Pro Bowler in 2019. So there were some things there, even with Marshawn Lynch, some of the baggage that he may carry. Marshawn Lynch never had issues finding employment. When the Seahawks needed a running back at the end of 2019, they brought him out of retirement, and he came out and played in the playoffs and had 3 rushing touchdowns. And there's just so many things about Marshawn Lynch that make fans from other teams. I would say, and this is crazy maybe for some fans, but I think Marshawn Lynch is the most global superstar that the Seattle Seahawks have ever had, and ahead of the Steve Largents of the world and some of the other players that have starred for him in recent years. I mean, Richard Sherman and those guys were all fantastic players, but Marshawn Lynch, you mentioned the name Marshawn Lynch in Thailand, or you mentioned the name in India or anywhere in South America, like there's a chance that most of those people are going to know who Marshawn Lynch is. This is a guy that transcends the United States. I mean, how many guys can you say that about the Seattle Seahawks? It's because of those crazy runs, but also the fact that this dude ate Skittles on the sideline, some of the other crazy things that he did with his press conferences. I'm just here so I won't get fined. I mean, he built a worldwide brand, and I think that carries weight when you're talking about voting for players in the Hall of Fame, whether it should or not. Marshawn Lynch, to me, has the much better chance of being a first ballot Hall of Famer. Oh, by the way, and I messed this up statistically, LaDainian Tomlinson also achieved this, but Marshawn Lynch is one of 2 backs in NFL history with 4 straight years with 1,200 rushing yards and at least 10 rushing touchdowns. 2 guys have done it. LaDainian Tomlinson was a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't think Marshawn Lynch was quite on his level. LaDainian Tomlinson's up there with the Barry Sanders of the world. But Marshawn Lynch is an exclusive company there. The iconic runs, how well he played in the postseason too. In the biggest of games, Seattle built themselves around Marshawn Lynch. He was the driving force behind that team, not the Legion of Boom. It was Marshawn Lynch. This is the guy that everybody in that team looked to. I just think he is the guy of these 2. And I think that what Earl Thomas has had happen since his career ended doesn't help his cause either, whether that should be part of the equation or not. You can't tell me that's not going to be weighing on some of the voters' minds.
Oh, it absolutely is weighing in some of the voters' minds. I mean, that's the thing, is that there is one running back in Seahawks and frankly NFL history who has clearly better numbers than what I mentioned before with Shaun Alexander, and then obviously Marshawn Lynch, and that would be another former Seahawk, and Adrian Peterson, who has 120 rushing touchdowns. He is actually second most among any NFL running backs who have not yet been voted into the Hall of Fame, behind only Frank Gore. I think that you could make an argument that Frank Gore was always very good. Was he ever great? That's the argument a lot of people are making. Adrian Peterson had 120 rushing touchdowns, and touchdowns are actually what kind of moves the needle for a lot of the national voters when it comes to the Hall of Fame. Shaun Alexander had 100 of them. That's why you and I have both argued that he also should be in Canton. Marshawn Lynch had 85. And that is significant, because if you just kind of put the rankings up there, I mean, in terms of rushing yards all time in their career, Marshawn Lynch is 13th among the NFL running backs that are not yet in the Hall of Fame. So that's going to be a difficult argument when you are trying to say that Marshawn Lynch deserves to be in the Hall of Fame from a purely numbers perspective. But throw the numbers out the window. My goodness, as you said, this is beast mode. This is a guy that had so many iconic moments on and off of the field. I think that he is a player that has just become synonymous with the Seahawks Super Bowl runs there that they had. So again, I do think that he deserves that acknowledgement. At the same time with Earl Thomas, again, just the freakish talent that he possesses. 30 interceptions may sound like a lot, and frankly, it is a lot for a free safety, but at the same time, it's not in the top 25 when you're talking about defensive backs in the NFL who have not yet yet been voted to the Hall of Fame. But again, his speed, his ball skills, that was one of the reasons why he didn't get very many interceptions. Certainly he had some corners and some safeties. Cam Chancellor also being a Hall of Fame, at least somebody who was nominated for the Hall of Fame here recently. But at the same time, I think the fact that Earl Thomas does not have the dominant numbers, and there have been, at least mixed reactions, certainly, as to what has gone on throughout the rest of his career on and off of the field. That is probably why Earl Thomas is going to be nominated for this honor. I think that he has that type of talent. Frankly, I think that he deserves that type of recognition. I just don't know that I ever see Earl Thomas actually being voted into the Hall of Fame, as much as it absolutely pains me to say so.
Yeah, I think Lynch is the one that is a much safer bet for all the reasons I mentioned: the on-field production, the iconic runs, the fact that he's still making headlines and he's been out of the league for 5 years. Because, I mean, how many players can go up and give a back rub to their head coach that they didn't even play for on the sideline and get away with it? Marshawn Lynch is probably the only dude in the world that could get away with that. And we saw it a couple weeks ago with Mike McDonald. I mean, he's Marshawn Lynch. There is only one of him. I think his charisma, his personality is going to be part of the reason he gets into the Hall of Fame quickly. Maybe it's not first ballot, but I think he's going to get in before Earl Thomas does. When we come back, we got to shift back to the present. The Seahawks got a big game with the Miami Dolphins coming up on Sunday as they look to move to 3-0. We're going to break down key matchups to watch with the Seahawks on defense against Miami's offense. That'll be coming up next year on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by DoorDash. Football is finally back, which means it's time to order your favorite game day food, snacks, and drinks on DoorDash without missing a play. When I'm enjoying football Sunday with my friends and family, there's nothing better than kicking back with a gluten-free Jet City pizza, cinnamon sticks, and a 2-liter root beer as we cheer on our favorite teams to victory. DoorDash makes it so easy to order our favorites, and we don't have to leave the comfort of our couch or miss a key play. Use promo code LOCKEDFALL24 for 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Limited time offer, terms apply. Promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to order your game day favorites. Must be 21 and older to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. We have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Bet on everything from DK Metcalf scoring 2 or more touchdowns against the or being the first player in Sunday's game with a 30-plus yard reception. Just throw in a $5 bet and you'll get a 3-week free trial to NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to Matchup Wednesday here on Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Morang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. And thank you, as always. We greatly appreciate you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. As we do each and every Wednesday, it is time to take a deep dive into all the critical matchups that are going to have an impact on who gets the victory when the Dolphins fly all the way from Miami out to Seattle for a road battle against the Seahawks on Sunday. And Rob, we are going to switch things up again. Week 1, it was Seahawks on defense going against the Broncos offense. And last week we did Seahawks offense. In the second segment, we're going to go back to the defensive side of the ball, going up against the Miami Dolphins offense. And I know the quarterback issue is going to be something we're going to talk about quite a bit today, but look, Skylar Thompson, he still has a number of really good receivers at his disposal. Tyreek Hill, still one of the very best in the NFL, can take the top off of any defense. And I don't care how good Seattle's corners have been to this point. This is going to be the toughest challenge that they've had. The first 2 teams they played, they didn't have anybody that could even hold serve with Tyreek Hill on his worst game. And this is one of the true superstar receivers in the NFL. Devin Witherspoon, Reek Woolen, Trey Brown, you better bring your A game or the cheetah himself, he is going to be flying downfield and be catching some big plays, potentially touchdowns in this game.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, I love the fact that this is where we are starting off, just because the fact that, I mean, if I was going to this game as a fan, this would be the number one matchup that I would be going there to watch. Just the fact that the Miami Dolphins have the speed at wide receiver that they have, certainly in Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle as well. They've got a very good slot receiver in Braxton Berrios. And I just, as we've talked about so many times, Corbin, we really believe that the Seattle's cornerbacks are among the elite units in the NFL. Considering that the Miami Dolphins have arguably the elite wide receiver group in the league also, then of course this is a natural matchup really to focus in on. I think that when you look at the 40-yard dash times of a Tariq Woolen, for example, and then you're going to compare it to what you can see on the field, say with the Tyreek Hill and as well as a Jaden Wallen, both 4.3 guys in terms of the 40-yard dash times, but they're even faster on the field. The very first time I saw Tyreek Hill, he was actually a member of the Oklahoma State Cowboys, and he played against Florida State, and Florida State, of course, is a perennial national contender, at least up until this season. And I remember watching him and just thinking, oh my goodness, the fastest guy on the field actually plays for Oklahoma State. Now Tyreek Hill, kind of like the conversation we had a moment ago, there's been some off-field things with him, but there is no denying the elite athletic ability. And so to me, that is exactly why I am fascinated by this matchup. It doesn't matter who is a quarterback. When you have that type of speed, that is the matchup to watch. Even if the Seahawks are able to get to a big lead, then the Miami Dolphins have the playmakers of the wide receiver position that could make this a, one of those games that you better stick around, because the Miami Dolphins have the ability to come back in a very quick hurry.
Yeah, Jalen Waddle is another guy that's 1,000-yard receiver. I mean, this team's got weapons. Braxton Berrios was kind of an under-the-radar addition at the slot position for them, and we won't see Odell Beckham Jr. The Dolphins are hoping to eventually have him, but the Seahawks will not have to deal with him this week. So this is a receiving core that there's a big drop-off after the first two guys, but those first two guys by themselves can win football games. That's the kind of talent we're talking about with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, who can both just flat out fly. So Seattle's corners better be ready. The safeties better be ready to protect back deep, because these are guys that can truly take the top off of defenses, and that's going to be a big part of this game. Let's shift gears now to the run game. And the Miami Dolphins, they've been banged up a little bit at running back. Raheem Mostert's been dealing with some injuries. They're hoping to have him back. But really, Achane is the running back that I want to focus on. We're looking against Seattle's linebackers. Jerome Baker did not practice today. Tyrell Dodson was a full participant. So Seattle may have Dodson, but Baker may not be ready with his hamstring to play against his former team, which means Tyrese Knight is going to get his first start in the NFL. And we liked what we saw last week, but let's face it, New England does not have any running backs. Antonio Gibson, I guess you could say, has a similar skill set, but Achane has been a more productive runner in his career than what Antonio Gibson has, who's been more of a receiver, being a former receiver at Memphis. But Achane can do a lot in the passing game as well. And they're going to be looking to get him on Seattle's linebackers, which is going to put a lot of pressure on not just Dodson, but Tyrese Knight. Hey, he's athletic, but is he athletic enough to deal with Achane, who has been an absolute menace when it comes to big plays in his brief NFL career?
Well, I'll answer the question you just said. Is Tyrese Knight athletic enough to match up against Achane? No. And Tyrese Knight, I think, is going to be an absolute stud in the NFL. But Achane, again, has the same type of explosive speed that we just talked about with Tyreek Hill and with Jalen Waddle. He's a legitimate 4.3 guy. Some watches 4.2 guy. And that is just a different level of speed. That's why the Miami Dolphins are dangerous. That's why they have been, a playoff contender, through the recent last couple of seasons here. This should be a terrifying matchup for the Seahawks, because we talked about this before. Obviously, Seattle finished, among the least successful defenses in run defense the last couple of seasons. And then even against the New England Patriots, when it was very clear that the number one priority was stopping Ramondre Stevenson, that to me was still the number one matchup, and still the Patriots were able to make that into a very competitive football game. Obviously went into overtime, and neither of the backs that the Patriots were using have the type of speed that Achane has. So again, this to me is the matchup. You mentioned the fact that Jerome Baker was unable to practice for the Seahawks this week. I feel confident that if there's any chance that he is able to play, he is going to want to play in this football game. But let's imagine that he does. He still doesn't have the speed to be able to play with Achane. So again, that is why it's going to be absolutely critical that the Seahawks are able to get real and consistent pressure on the quarterback.
I want to talk about that pressure on the quarterback because to me, and we talked about this going into the show, we're going to highlight Skylar Thompson here because he has only played a handful of snaps in regular season games in the NFL. He almost has as many playoff snaps as he has in the regular season. The Dolphins had to start him a couple years ago in a playoff game, and they lost that one to the Buffalo Bills. But Thompson has not played very many regular season snaps, and Seattle's edge rushing group. Now, Boye Mafe did not practice today. From my understanding, they are just being cautious with him. I think there's a good chance he plays this weekend. Draymond Jones, they've got to get more out of him than what they have gotten these first couple games. Maybe Uchenna Nwosu comes back. I think that's probably more of a long shot, but you at least have Derek Hall. You've got Gibson that they traded for from the Jaguars, Travis Gibson. They've got some bodies there. They've got some guys in their practice squad they can call up too, including Tyus Bowser, who has played against the Dolphins plenty of times in his career. So I look at that edge group and the fact that Teron Armstead did not practice today for the Dolphins, that would be a huge loss for Miami if he is not able to play. Their starting left tackle, an all-pro caliber player, even at this stage of his career, is still one of the better left tackles in the league when he's healthy. And on the other side, Austin Jackson's career has been very up and down. And he's had some injuries. He's been inconsistent. It feels like the Seahawks can really squeeze the pocket off the edge against the tackles, especially if Teron Armstead's not healthy or he's not able to play at all in this game. This feels like a position that the Seahawks could capitalize on, even if they're mixing in some sim pressures to bring in some corners off the edge and doing some different games. That can really mess with a quarterback like Skylar Thompson, who just hasn't played a lot of regular season NFL football.
No, he hasn't, obviously. But at the same time, I love the fact that you mentioned Seattle's edge rushers by name. And again, this is the argument that I would make. This isn't even really about Miami's offensive tackles. Look, Teron Armstead is an athletic freak, and Austin Jackson is a terrific football player as well. The right tackle backup is Patrick Paul, a player that I personally viewed as a first-round caliber player that wound up slipping into the second round for the Dolphins this past season. He was a 5-year starter at the college level, so I don't believe that the Dolphins are necessarily missing much if Austin Jackson, former first-round pick out of USC, is unable to play. I mentioned before that I love the fact that you mentioned Seattle's pass rushers by name, and I want to focus in here for a moment on Boye Mafe, who I would argue is going to likely be Seattle's top pass rusher this year. He led the Seahawks in sacks a year ago, but there have been a couple of plays so far this season, Corbin, where when Boye Mafe has almost been too fast upfield. His inability to adjust in space has allowed, say, Jacoby Brissett this past week to kind of create a little bit of a running game of his own. And that to me is where you have to be concerned about Skylar Thompson. You cannot get much more different than the starting quarterback for the Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa, a classic drop back passer, and Skylar Thompson, who is much more of a scrambler. And so if Boye Mafe and the rest of Seattle's pass rushers are unable to to kind of turn the corner and maintain their position, then Skylar Thompson is going to do the exact same thing that Jacoby Brissett did. He's going to allow that pass rusher to get upfield, and he's just going to run upfield. And that, because I'm expecting Seattle's linebackers and safeties to be very, busy covering Miami's running backs and wide receivers, then that is going to create potentially huge yardage opportunities for Skylar Thompson to take advantage of. So again, that to me is the biggest area of concern, I think, for the Seahawks, is their pass rushers have to maintain their integrity. They have to be consistent in that approach. Otherwise, this could be a game that quite literally could run away from the Seahawks.
When we come back, we're going to be switching sides. Seahawks on offense going up against the Miami Dolphins defense in week 3. Don't go away. You're listening to Matchup Wednesday here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. This episode of Locked On Seahawks is brought your way by your friends over at GameTime. You shouldn't have to skip a mortgage payment when you want to buy a ticket to your next big event. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the music, sports, comedy, and theater near you. They offer killer last-minute deals, all-in prices. They can show you views from your seat and with their best price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You want to see the Seahawks this weekend against the Dolphins at Lumen Field? I just checked this out. You can still get seats at one of the loudest venues in the NFL in the lower bowl for under $100. Great seats without breaking the budget to see some exciting young talent for both teams as the Seahawks look to move to 3-0. GameTime offers deals on tickets right into the day of the event. And with GameTime's guarantee, you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? Game time. Welcome back to Matchup Wednesday here on Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Don't forget for your second listen to check out the new Locked On NFL 2 shows every day. The madman Tyler Rowland kicks it off in the morning with a double shot of NFL Espresso. And then make sure to stop by the barbershop with the always funny Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts. You get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL. Make sure that it's your second listen on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Continuing to dive into the key matchups. Seahawks, Dolphins, Week 3, Battle Royale at Lumen Field. It's time to talk Seahawks on the offensive side of the football against the Miami Dolphins on defense. And look, I feel like we're covering an NFC West game starting off with this, with all the years that we had to cover this matchup. But look, we can't skip DK Metcalf against Jalen Ramsey. I mean, this is one of the most intense, competitive one-on-one matchups that you are ever going to see between a receiver and a cornerback. These are two of the utmost competitors in the NFL at any position. They both hate losing. They go hard every single play. They've got the ability to talk some trash, and obviously they're both imposing figures at their position as well, and it just makes it such an exciting, it's one of those get your popcorn ready matchups. Metcalf versus Ramsey, first time in a couple years they played against each other since Ramsey was traded by the Rams to the Dolphins, and you know Jalen Ramsey's going to want to get even there because DK Metcalf has kind of had his number a little bit the last couple of times that he played against the Rams with Ramsey out on the outside.
Yeah, that kind of makes me chuckle a little bit when you say he's got his number. I mean, last time I saw Jalen Ramsey going against DK Metcalf, it was Jalen Ramsey's number that I saw because he was on the back of DK Metcalf after he caught, as he caught the game-winning touchdown. So that's kind of one of those memories for a lot of Seahawks fans out there that I think is very much in Jalen Ramsey's memory, and that's why this is going to be a fascinating matchup. You said before, Corbin, the tickets are going for less than $100 in the lower bowl. I mean, considering the matchups that we have as far as Seattle's wide receivers against Miami's corners, specifically DK Metcalf against Jalen Ramsey, obviously, but then also Miami's wide receivers against Seattle's cornerbacks. To me, look, I am a line of scrimmage kind of a guy, but this is one of those games that is just fascinating on the perimeter. I think that sometimes, though, we can focus too much on just the one primary matchup. And look, again, I am fascinated. DK versus Jalen Ramsey to me is just interesting to a whole different degree. But at the same time, I also think that it's important to mention the fact that the Miami Dolphins have a great deal of talent at the cornerback position as well. I think that when you look at the fact that they also have, I'm sorry, now I just lost my notes here, but they have Kendall Fuller, former first-round selection out of Virginia Tech, at the other starting cornerback spot. And then a player I'm actually pretty high on, Kader Kohu, who is their nickel cornerback. This is a 3-year starter who has been very successful at that slot, whatever you want to call it, nickel corner, slot corner position. Obviously with Jackson Smith and Jig, but having really the breakout performance that he did in leading the Seahawks in receptions in this last victory against the New England Patriots, I really think that's somebody that is going to be heavily involved in this game. And obviously Tyler Lockett just does what he does. So again, the wide receivers versus the cornerbacks, regardless of who is on the field actually taking the snaps, that is the matchup, the key matchup to watch in this football game.
I'm going to disagree with you that it's the key matchup, though. I'm going to go to the trenches because, look, we kind of hit at this yesterday. Calais Campbell is still a very good player for being a 38-year-old that has been in the league. I feel like he's been in the league since the day I was born. Like, he has been around a long time.
Pretty much.
Yeah, but he's still very good. He had a sack in one of their first 2 games. He's a guy that can still play a significant number of snaps. He keeps himself in phenomenal shape, but Miami lost Christian Wilkins in free agency to the Raiders. And this is a team, when I look at the depth and I just look at some of the other losses that they have had the last few years, they're pretty thin right now in their interior defensive line. Buffalo was able to run the football extremely well last week against them. And I think one of the big reasons why is because they couldn't hold up in the interior. Now, we know that the Seahawks interior offensive line, that's been a bugaboo for Seattle so far this season. But if there's a game they can kind of get things right, I think this is the game that they can do it. And we talked about that motivation factor earlier with Jerome Baker. Connor Williams, this is his 3rd game coming back from an ACL tear. I have a feeling that not just because he's playing against his former team, but it's game 3, another week of practice. I think we're going to start seeing Connor Williams really start playing the way that he's capable of going against his former team in this game. And then Anthony Bradford and Laken Tomlinson, I'm expecting we're going to see some Christian Haynes too. If there is a game where they are going to be able to get some of that movement up front that they couldn't get this last game, New England's got some big bodies in the middle. They were having trouble moving them. Miami's got some depth concerns at that defensive tackle position. I think the Seahawks can wear them down in their home field. I actually like this matchup for the guards and for Connor Williams much better than I liked the first 2 games against the Broncos and the New England Patriots.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that point. I think that this is a game that is set up for Seattle's interior offensive line to kind of impose their will a little bit, just because Miami lacks size other than Calais Campbell, 6'8", but still, we talked about the fact that he's going to struggle a little bit with leverage. You should be able to run against him. And then Connor Williams, obviously, with just the revenge factor, I think that is fascinating. I want to focus again a little bit on an individual matchup and Laken Tomlinson specifically, because I thought that you were very astute in pointing out that, hey, everybody's talking about the right guard position. Laken Tomlinson struggled a little bit, especially in this past week against the Patriots and Keon White. You know, Laken Tomlinson, you and I were both there at the home opener. And one of the things that they put on the jumbo screen is the way that some of the players kind of walked into that game. And there was a debate about who was dressed better. And Laken Tomlinson won because he walked in there basically an old kind of he had the chaps, he had a leather vest. I mean, they were playing the Broncos. He looked kind of cowboyish. Look, I don't care if he walks in with freaking goggles and a snorkel. He had better be effective against the Miami Dolphins. Otherwise, all that talk about Christian Haynes, it might be at the left guard position. So again, I think that this is a fascinating matchup for the Seahawks. They have got to be able to run the ball right down the Dolphins' throat. Otherwise, again, this could be much more of a pick 'em kind of a game that I think a lot of Seahawks fans are expecting.
And I want to take this to another level because I think the guards in the center go with this. To me, this is a game that you get that between the tackles run game going. And look, Ken Walker III didn't practice today. The Seahawks signed another running back to their practice squad. It feels like the Seahawks are not feeling good about him being available this week. So we may be seeing another game where Zach Charbonnet is getting the bulk of the reps, and then Kenny McIntosh maybe plays a little bit more. Maybe we actually see George Halani get a few reps in the backfield. But it feels like things are trending towards Ken Walker III not being ready to play yet this week. But I think that this is still a game when you're looking at the guard center thing. If they're going to be able to win up front and create some movement, then I want to see Zach Charbonnet against his former teammate Jordan Brooks and this rebuilt Dolphins linebacking crew, because away from Brooks, this is a kind of small linebacker group that Miami's got out there. If they are able to get downhill and run the football against them, you got to wonder. And again, Jordan Brooks racks up a lot of tackles, but not a lot of them are near the line of scrimmage. If you can get him downfield and you can get blockers up to him, I feel like the Seahawks can have a lot more success running the ball this week, and Zach Charbonnet can actually have some room to operate and get full steam ahead, which he couldn't do very often in Foxborough.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you just mentioned the former teammate, of course, Zach Charbonnet, Jordan Brooks. The fact that Seattle signed their running back, there's another former teammate of Zach Charbonnet's, and Britton Brown from UCLA. At least that's where they played their college ball together. I think that's interesting that the Seahawks signed Britton Brown. He's kind of a bigger back. He is more in the Zach Charbonnet role in frame and style than, say, a Kenneth Walker. And let's be real, there's very few running backs out there who are in the Kenneth Walker style. But still, I would agree with you in that this is a little bit concerning from a Seahawks fan perspective. If you were hoping that K9 is going to be on the field for the Seahawks, the fact that they just signed a running back to their practice squad, again, suggests that they have some concern about his ability to make this football game. But I agree, as we talked about, I have very big concerns about Seattle's ability to slow down Miami's wide receivers. I don't care who is throwing them the ball. They can flat fly. And the easiest way to slow them down, of course, is to have an effective running game of your own to keep them off the damn field. And so to me, this is a game where we just talked about that we're hoping to see Connor Williams or Laken Tomlinson, Anthony Bradford, Christian Haynes be able to move some people at the line of scrimmage. I'm hoping to see Zach Charbonnet be able to get his first 100-yard rushing game in a Seahawks uniform, because it does feel like that is possible against an undersized defensive line, an undersized linebacking core, and again, anticipating the Seahawks are going to be trying to run the ball down the Dolphins' throats.
As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be teaming up with Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins. It's crossover Thursday. We're going to take an even deeper dive into this upcoming matchup between former AFC foes at Lumen Field. You won't want to miss it. That show will be coming out early in the morning, 12. So make sure you're listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night. Go Hawks.